Let me start with a simple proposition, and that is the internet is the driving cause to the hyperpolarization we're experiencing today. The driving cause to the really different than the past history we've seen in politics, in government, in society, and how it's becoming more and more dysfunctional. Now, I'm an internet guy, so let me tell you a little bit about that. But the thing that's interesting is when you understand the cause, when you see how it happened, you also see something very important, which is this. We can fix that. We really can. And so let me kind of bring you up to how I got here. So my name's John Gable. I'll explain to you why I started All Sides and how I'm so thrilled about the Transpartisan Alliance and Transpartisan Leadership Group that I just really recently discovered. So starting college, philosophy major, taught philosophy, actually a lot of math, a lot of engineering, complete geek who wanted to change the world. And so I went into politics and worked in campaigns, state, local, federal, presidential campaigns for the party, and did lots of exciting things and used a lot of technology, high tech then, which is kind of unusual in the 80s back then. And then I went to technology, transitioned to that world, got an MBA at Duke and went technology, found myself on the original Microsoft Office team up in Seattle. And then actually started a company where we were focused on collaborating online and how to do that early. I mean, in the 90s, before you really talked about online collaboration. In fact, we didn't really know what to call it, frankly, at the time. And I ended up down here in Silicon Valley working for Netscape and became the lead product manager for Netscape Navigator when we actually launched Mozilla that became Firefox, which I think people are familiar with. And I'll stop there because that kind of gives you how I got here and what really is interesting. I mean, back in the early days, in the 90s of the internet, and there were earlier days, but in the 90s, we really had this sense that, you know what, when you can reach people around the world and get all these ideas and all these different perspectives, we'll be able to understand things better than we ever have been able to. We'll be able to connect with people like we never have. We'll be able to make better decisions and come together as a glorious world singing hallelujah, holding hands together. Even back then, and I'm definitely drank the Kool-Aid, as we used to say, about the internet. Even back then, I gave a little spiel saying, I'm not sure if it's going to happen that way. And it actually happened far worse than I ever imagined, where the internet seems to be doing the opposite of what we had hoped. And some years later, doing other technology stuff, I was like, okay, we've got to do something about this, okay? My baby, if I can call it my baby, one of 100,000 people, I'm one of those 100,000 people, isn't working right. It isn't quite doing what we'd hoped it would do. So I tried some things in our neighborhood. I mean, California, as everybody knows who lives here, we have initiatives just out of control, and we have piles of them, and they're good or bad or whatever. And so I thought, you know what, for my neighborhood, just for my friends, I'm actually going to do kind of a left-right pro-con analysis of the initiatives. I mean, I used to work in politics. This shouldn't be that hard. I'll make a very succinct list of kind of the pros that support it, who's putting money in it, why they're supporting it, not just kind of what's in the news stories, but kind of what's really going on behind it, supporting it and against it. That was really hard. For a guy who knows politics and knows the internet, in modern day, it was really hard to give a good presentation of the best pros and cons around an initiative. It took me forever. And I thought, well, if it takes me, and I think I have a little background here, the country's got to be just hosed. That's where the internet's failing us. So when you go from there, you got to look at the problem a little bit. So let's look at polarization a little bit and start there. And this is dramatically different than we've seen in history. So what this chart shows, the red line is actually, this is how Congress votes, where the red line is actually the House, and the blue line is actually the Senate. It's not Republicans, Democrats. And the higher when you're really low on the chart, that actually shows when Republicans and Democrats are voting together. So right after World War II, you expect it to be low. Right after the Civil War, where this begins, you expect it to be higher than any time in history. Sorry, it's much higher now. The polarization in Congress has been radically jumping in the last 10 to 15, 20 years, radically jumping, far beyond even historical norms, and the trajectory is terrifying. But it's not just Congress. If you look at what's happened in society, Congress is reflecting us. We like to blame them, and there are lots of things going on there, but we got to look at ourselves here. So in 1994, 20 years ago, when Pew Research is this great thing when they kind of chart people's opinions on different political issues. And it looks like what you expect, basically a bell curve. If you go forward to 20 years later, you actually see that the Democrats and Republicans have both moved out tremendously away from each other. Instead of seeing a bell curve, you see a two-humped camel. And yes, there is common ground in the middle. That's important. But this is not healthy. This is a bad indication. And this is to show you that it is not a normal up and down, normal society thing. Something's different is happening here. Something very different. We need to understand why. So let's start thinking about the internet. Because what happened, okay, so in the last 10 or 15, 20 years, you know what else has happened? This thing called the internet. This thing about us getting information online. The thing about me becoming friends of my friends and only connecting with friends of my friends, people just like me. If you think about the internet, it's a crazy, overwhelmingly noisy world. There's all this information, all these people. You're just overwhelmed with the noise. And so what do we do about that? Well, I mean, here you are in the middle of this crazy world, and you kind of got this little bubble where you have to push back all that noise. And then so what we do is we let through that bubble a little bit. We let through ideas similar to our ideas. We let through people just like me, friends of my friends. And what you end up with is a filter bubble or a bias bubble where you only see things that you already agree with and only know people just like you. So in a way, it's kind of like, I mean, this is kind of like having a little fun with it. But okay, I'm really busy. I want to know what's going on. So I guess I'll look at this one thing online. Well, tomorrow I'm right. You see, I told you I was right. I'm confident and self-righteous. I'm right. My friends are right. And everyone else, they're either evil or they're idiots. I mean, we all kind of laugh about that. I mean, we've all heard that. We've all thought that occasionally. And so what does that lead to? It leads to what we're seeing today. Serious polarization, dysfunctional government. And it's kind of like, why can't we just get anything done? It's their fault. Whether you're on the left or right or these different quadrants, it's their fault. So that leads to not just polarization, it's always been with us, but a new level of hyperpolarization, where it's not just that you and I disagree on what to do about the environment or the economy, but you're not just wrong, you're evil. And if you're evil, even if we agree on something or agree on a different issue, I'm not going to work with you because you're evil. And that cuts out all the possibilities of coming together for society and for each of us. And that's what leads to that dysfunction in the government, in the media, in politics, and I'd say in individual lives. It actually goes beyond politics. And we'll get there. So what do you do about that? So you got to burst that bubble. You got to go back to that core cause of that bubble. And you don't necessarily have to burst it exactly. You just kind of put a little pinprick in it. So here we are again. Here I am in my little world, keeping too much out, all the other stuff out. And then I let people like me into my little world, ideas like mine into my little world. And all we have to do is we don't have to burst the bubble. We just have to let a few other people in, specifically people that are a little different than I am, who have different ideas, and bring those different ideas. That little change, which is a little pinprick in that bubble, is dramatically changing in what happens in life. So to get there, we had to change the way we get information and how we interact with each other. So how do you do that? What works? Well, what I discovered when I joined this Transpartisan Alliance and really got excited about is that there are all these people, like Mark Erzon and others, who have been real worldwide experts on how to mediate groups that disagree with each other. And we have done this a great deal over time. We know how to do this. Humankind knows how to bring people together who completely disagree on things, have a common understanding, get together and work through it. We know how to do this. And by the way, the comment field in a news press article is not the way to do it. being in Facebook and saying, yeah, not the way to do it. In fact, people are less likely to disagree on Facebook than they are in real life. And in fact, if you use Facebook a lot, you're less likely to disagree with your friends, even in regular life, than you are with people who don't use Facebook a lot. The internet's training us to be afraid to say anything different and have a civil conversation with differences. So what does that look like? Every time I've looked at these mediation processes, and there are lots of different groups and all these different steps, they all start, all part of it is getting multiple perspectives, listening to other ideas, hearing facts that you never heard before, hearing opinions you never heard before, listening. And then the next piece of that is actually engaging in a civil dialogue. There are lots of ways we know how to make that happen. There are lots of success stories in the real world that you can do online and in real life. So let me give you some examples of what that might look like. So the news, State of the Union address, just recent. So it's interesting when you look at how different people covered it. In the State of the Union, Obama makes a middle-class pitch. That seems reasonable, kind of a center point of view. That's what he did. Well, on the right, what Obama didn't say. He completely left out everything about the problem, a serious problem about the debt and entitlement crisis. I mean, we got a problem there. We know it's a problem. On the right, woohoo, Obama sets out an ambitious agenda. On the left, thank you, on the left. Well, what's interesting is I'm less interested in left, center, right as much as I'm interested in the fact that they're completely different perspectives of exactly the same thing. And just reading those headlines, you get a broader sense of what happened than if you read any one of those articles all the way through. That begins to expose us to different ideas. It begins to help us appreciate people with different ideas. A fun one from gay marriage. This happened actually when we were at an earlier conference. When the Supreme Court decided not to listen to some appeals, you heard from the left, 5 states get marriage equality, woohoo! And you hear from the right, Supreme Court rejects the appeals from 5 states. You know, very different perspectives on what's going on. But it can be more than just news. It can also be about issues. So the issue of education, how do we improve in education? Very important. It isn't just different sides, but different items within it, different details. What do we do about funding? Well, you can set up and have a way of dialogue online that it actually encourages people to list the pros and cons. What we found with this kind of interface is that even people who are really 100% supporting an idea, they'll list the pros and the cons for their belief. And when you get in that mindset, you're suddenly willing to listen to other people's points of view. It's about how you interface and how you interact. And in fact, we can even show people what the most persuasive pros and cons are to supporters, as well as to people who oppose. So you can understand where people are coming from. Those are examples of the kinds of things you can do online. There's a lot more, and living room conversations and other groups are doing some fascinating things to really bring us together. But that is possible. That is real. And so so we can have a different world. Let me just quickly see different perspectives so I can decide. Puts me in control, empowers me. Tomorrow, what does that lead to? Well, I actually have friends that are different than I am. I can make better decisions, can actually have more information to make those decisions. Things are actually looking up. And the future is what we want. Better schools, more jobs, less violence. We don't always agree, and this is not about always agreeing. Some polarization is good. Some disagreement is good. But things are getting better. We're willing to work together on those things. And if you think about political action, the politicians are following the people. We've got to learn how to talk with each other, and we can make that possible. We can empower that. And that's actually what we want to do together. Thank you.